Nobody yet.
Hi, welcome to my almost garden on this wonderfully rainy day here in Central Florida. Outside we're getting some much needed rain. It's been really dry. Pretty standard for us to be dry most of the winter, but for April we've gotten very little rain. So we're really enjoying this weather outside. A friend of mine called Violet. Violet, or sweet violet, Viola adorata, is native to more northern European environments. North America does have a few indigenous species, such as the Viola papilionaceae, but over the years it has been naturalized to the US. It can be found in forests and woodlands, all over the land that we currently call the United States. She prefers to grow in the shade and spreads through runners or seeds. You can see these beautiful little seed growing here. She has flowers that do not need to be pollinated. She just produces these seeds. And these seeds, once you have violet in your yard, you will find it in lots of lovely little spots and pots, and it's pretty prolific. She is a perennial. She has those lovely heart-shaped leaves with sawtooth edges. See the heart? Sawtooth edges. There are many species of violet and all have medicinal value. When I was a kid, my mom used to dig up violet from the forest and bring it into her landscaping. She just had an attraction to it, and the older I get and the more I get to know violet, I can see what a wonderful friend to have in the garden it can be. It's moistening, super high in vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin A, and even iron. One of my favorite ways of enjoying violet in my life is taking a little leaf. I really prefer the more new growth. I find that it's sweeter and has a nice moistening soft flavor. I just nibble it. It's a little bit pungent, a little bit bitter. Can definitely taste that vitamin C. It's also sweet and cooling. It does to my mouth what aloe can do to my skin. It's really soothing and moistening. Both the leaves and the flowers are edible. And right now we have the true flowers. They happen around April or May here in Florida. If you live in more northern climates, you'll find them flowering June, July. And then sometime around fall, August or September here in Florida, we have these beautiful, showy, purple, violet, what a lot of people perceive as flowers, but they're actually just the violet adding a little touch of beauty to our fall. Everything is edible though. It's really nice to throw them into salads, tea blends. They get incorporated there often. Medicinally, they can be found to be alterative, which is one way of describing something that really helps your blood move through your body. And alterative is beneficial in a lot of ways. One of them is getting our lymph moving. I don't know about you, but I'm definitely moving less than I was a few weeks ago these days, and it can be really helpful for me to help my body move that lymph through. It can also be, oh, is there a question? Okay, what's the question?
It says, is this Viola Prima Folia edible?
So this variety and any of the true violas are edible, the leaves and the flowers. The roots have a more cathartic impact on the body that I try to avoid, but the leaves and the flowers can be really nice. It's considered an anti-inflammatory, and some people say it's because that way it helps things move through your body, that just helps flush out any inflammation that you might have. Considered antiseptic, astringent, which astringent means that it can be moving the liquid away from you. Sometimes if it's astringent in your mouth, it feels like things are drier. But sometimes astringent can have this moistening experience. But check in with your medical doctor, your primary care physician, if you have any conditions, because whatever I say today is not going to be equal to any of those things. I'm sharing my love of a plant, and I look forward to hearing from you and how you decide to use this plant in your life. So it's also considered demulcent, and demulcent is a word that's used to describe that moistening feeling, that like filling your mouth with moisture or soothing on the skin. Demulcent is sometimes referred to things that go on the skin that can be really moistening. It's also a diaphoretic, which means that it helps you to sweat. And I don't know about you in Central Florida, there aren't many reasons I want to sweat, but sometimes it can be helpful for situations like fever. But again, that's some place that you'll need to check in with your medical providers on fever. It can also be helpful as an expectorant, specifically if I'm feeling really dry, raspy coughing. I find violet a really nice way to moisten up my lungs and help get that, whatever the junk is, out. Some of my favorite ways of incorporating violet into my life, other than eating it, is a nice long infusion. Now, not all plants can be used in this way, where I'm going to talk about letting it sit for a really long time with a lot of plant material inside. But most of the time, those plants that you really lean on to that are high in nutrients can be really helpful in this way. So do your research, make sure you're not just treating all plants in this way, but violet can be really lovely. So this is dried violet. If you want to learn more about teas, you can check in. Emily Ruff, one of our educators and director of our school, is going to be teaching a class just on working with teas tomorrow night. So tea is technically a term that's used for working with one plant. That's a Camellia sinensis. So technically what I'm doing right here is a tisane or an infusion. And I'm putting about a cup of that dried herb in my jar. And I could use the fresh herb for this, and I'd probably use more of that fresh herb if I was going to. Violet pops up all over my yard and usually have pretty easy access to all that wonderful plant material. But I find if I really want to have access to it year-round, that it's helpful if I dry it. Is there a question?
Is the dried plant matter you are using just the leaves?
Yeah, there's a little bit of stem action, but mostly leaves, yes. So this will be really high in vitamin C, vitamin A. So I have about a cup of dried plant material in my jar. And I'm going to add hot water from my kettle, and just use precautions if you decide to do this, and make sure that, sometimes the jar will crack when I do this, and there are a couple of things that I do to avoid that cracking, is to make sure the jar is close to room temperature. It's not something I've just taken out of the dishwasher on the sanitize mode or something like that. It's close to room temperature, and the surface that I'm putting it on isn't super cold. If you have stone countertops or something like that, the countertops can be a lot colder than the jar, and you have more potential for breaking. So just use some safety practices there. Sometimes you can put your spoon or a knife into the jar to temper it, to transfer the heat. But this jar should be fine. We're not using the AC right now. It's a little cool outside, but it's Florida cool, so it's probably about 80. And then my hot water from my kettle, although usually I would have it piping hot, just below boiling, it's not that hot right now. So I'm adding water. Being careful not to burn myself. Yum. So this water extraction is going to pull out all those vitamins and minerals, and vitamin C is something I'm really trying to incorporate into my daily practices. And violet can be a really nice source of vitamin C. This really long infusion, I will let steep 6 to 8 hours. And then I'll strain out the plant material. I'll likely compost that plant material. And then I'll drink that lovely violet infusion, and it will moisten all my insides. And I can let this sit out on my counter, or I let it get close to room temperature and then I stick it in the fridge overnight. especially if you're in Florida and you're not using your air conditioning right now, there can be a lot of molds and fungus in the air, and I just try to be really mindful of that. So that's a really long infusion. The next way that I like to bring the minerals into my life is with apple cider vinegar. It's another really great way to get the minerals from the violet into my day-to-day. And vinegars can be incorporated into salad dressing. I like to add them to soups and stews and sprinkle them over an avocado and call it lunch. But it's a really similar process of any other tincturing method that you use. I'm going to be spending about an hour on tinctures later on this week if you're really into that. But for today, the apple cider vinegar can give you a chance to keep that violet in your day-to-day life without having access to the plant. Sometimes if I'm traveling, I'll bring a little bit with me. Moistening, nourishing. So I'm filling up half my jar. You can use fresh herb for this. About half. And I'm just going to fill my jar. With that vinegar. And your goal with any tincturing method is to make sure that all of your plant material is covered up by the liquid. So this one, with vinegar, you also want to make sure you either are using parchment paper, or I have this plastic lid that you can access with any other of your canning. Wherever you get canning equipment, they usually have these plastic lids with the rubber washer on it. And I add my lid. If you don't have to have the plastic, you can just use parchment paper, or otherwise the vinegar will rust my lid. And you can see that happens sometimes. And I don't usually use them when they have this much rust on them. So after this presentation, I'm gonna take this lid and exchange it out for one with rust on it. But one way I protect my lids from the rust, because I can reuse these often, is by using either wax paper or parchment paper or the plastic lid. There's a question?
Shouldn't we get rid of the rubber, or is it non-toxic?
Non-toxic. Okay. So, great question. Keeping everybody healthy out there. So I shake it, and shaking it is kind of the delightful part. You know, anytime you're holding your jar, whatever you're thinking and feeling, I feel like, is going into whatever's inside. So I might do a little dance, think about how much that violet loves us, and looking forward to all that moistening into my body and all that vitamin C, and how healthy I'm going to be when I'm drinking it. Once a day, pick it up, do a little dance. And question?
Is wax paper okay to use?
So I think you heard my hesitation when I said wax paper. So I find that parchment paper definitely works better. The wax paper, I've used it in a pinch. It's not my favorite because the wax paper, when you're shaking it, the vinegar has a tendency to wear away the wax paper in a way that it doesn't as much with the parchment paper. Both are impacted by the vinegar, but I find that wax paper, it's a little bit more. So if you're using wax paper, or you're using a lid that you want to be, have less contact with it, either find a way to, borrow from a friend or something. These plastic lids, and plastic isn't my favorite. I keep trying to figure out a way to have something that isn't going to negatively impact my body when I'm making medicine, but really I just do the best I can with what I have. So if wax paper is what you have, just be aware that whenever you're shaking it, you want to notice how your wax paper is looking. Maybe look in there and just make sure everything looks good, and keep us posted. If you have questions, you can always comment on this video, and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. Okay? All right. So that is my violet vinegar. Half the jar full of dried plant material. You can use fresh, that's fine. You just want to make sure you chop it up or put it in a mortar and pestle and pound it a little bit so that you're opening up the cell walls of that plant. I filled it up with apple cider vinegar, and I'm labeling it because this is going to sit on my counter for 2 to 6 weeks. And Shannon's going to be talking all about vinegars later on this week if you want to know more about working with them and how you can incorporate them into your lives. And she'll talk more about how the difference is between 2 and 6 weeks when she's talking about all those. So this is my violet apple cider vinegar. Some people like to put a harvest date on their label, but I find that it's really helpful for me if I put the date that I put it into the jar. That's my favorite. So I'm going to let this sit on the counter in my kitchen where I see it, away from my stove, and I'm going to pick it up and lovingly think about it every day and shake it for about 6 weeks. Then I'm going to open it and strain out my plant material, and that vinegar I'll be able to use either in salad dressings or adding it to soups and stews, or I can splash a little bit of that apple cider vinegar into my water, and it can be really tasty any time of day. So, any questions? Before I move on to our last way I like to incorporate violet into my life, I just want to point out some more growing thoughts. So you can see that the violet has made its way into the horsetail pot. And our friend that I picked this plant up from was so nice that they not only put the horsetail label, but they also pointed out my little Florida violet flower plant there. And horsetail and violet, and there are little baby violets in there. You can see those. So it needs a lot of moisture. I mentioned the forest floor and the shade, and it's really happy in those like densely mulched areas. Anytime I've found little seeds and put them into a pot, I make sure to give it lots of moisture and cover it with some of my leaves so that it has a nice moist environment, because it really prefers that. Okay, so violet has a long use of being used in topical preparations as well. So it has a moving impact and moistening impact on the inside whenever I have my tea or my vinegar, but it can also have that benefit when it's applied topically. So historically, it's made into an oil. So the question, yeah?
Are you able to keep it indoors?
So I think that for my friends who live in places where maybe they have a humidifier in their home, Violet would be happy with a humidifier. But here I know I have it inside right now, but typically it lives outside on my porch, even in the pots. It really likes moisture. And I find that if you either live in a really dry climate, and it's harder, it won't grow with your cactus, that it's challenging. And often in like Central Florida, we use enough air conditioning that the air inside of our home is usually really dry. And we like it that way for a lot of reasons. It really helps us to eliminate the molds and the fungi that are molds that are in the air. And it can help our lungs stay happy to have that drier air inside, because 80% humidity outside is great for the violet, but we want to make sure that we're getting a lot of movement. So I think that's why violet is so beneficial for helping move the dry stuff out, because it's so moistening. So if you're going to try it inside, just remember that it really likes that moisture and the movement that happens in soil outside. It is a temptation, I think, for people who are keeping water-loving plants inside to think that they need to keep the tray with moisture in it all the time. And that's just not true, you know? So a plant that lives in the forest, especially here in Florida, the soil is draining all the time. So if you're keeping it inside, and I love the idea of trying it, just try it, see what happens, let us know how it goes. Especially if you're living in an apartment or space where you want to bring green life into your world, try it. You know, it's one of these plants that is totally fine without getting any sunshine, and some of us live in ways like that. When I first moved to California a really long time ago, I lived in this gorgeous old warehouse that basically the only window was looking out at public transportation or the subway rail outside of my window. And I was really grateful for that living space, but I found myself really needing to have greenery in my life. And I tried a lot of different ways of bringing plants inside. And Violet was one of my friends that I wanted to bring into that environment. And she was happy for the few months that I was there, but I think she really prefers to be in the ground outside. So try it, let me know what you think. And remember that if you are trying to make sure there's enough moisture, that you're not just letting water sit in the bottom of the tray. You want to make sure that that tray is not stagnant water. And you can see this tray is really small and not really designed to hold a lot of water. I mostly use it to protect the wood on our porch. So there isn't a lot of water that can stand there, and occasionally, even for the plant that's outside, I'll lift it up and dump out that tray occasionally as a way to make sure that the plant is getting, the soil is not stagnant. The water has a chance to go all the way through. So topically, it has historically been used in oils, and specifically breast oils. There's a long history of violet oils being used for fibrocystic breasts and just getting that lep tissue moving. When I incorporate violet or oils that are used topically into my life, the process is really similar, for me, the process is really similar to what I showed you with the vinegar, except my liquid is oil. Most of the time in Florida, I'm using either dried plant material or plant material that doesn't have a lot of moisture in the leaves. And violet is a plant that you'll often see for herbal oil recipes that people suggest using the fresh plant. So taking the leaves of the fresh plant, chopping them up, putting them into a jar, and then covering them with oil. I've read a recipe where you do that, and then the next day you watch for the moisture that's settled on the bottom and you pour off the oil. And that's great if you live in a climate that has very little moisture in the air. But I found in Florida that really leaves it prone to mold. So if you choose to do your own herbal oil with the fresh plant, which is a really lovely way to get violet as a topical preparation for you, make sure you're watching out for that moisture, okay? So there are other methods. You can have little crock pot and put the plant material and your oil inside and bring it up to a heat, but think about the raw food temperatures and trying to keep your plant material at a really, really low heat. And sometimes crock pots or things like that will have those super low settings so you can keep your oil at a really low temperature. Is there a question?
Yes, can I plant this from seed now? I live in Connecticut.
Yeah, I think Connecticut would actually be a great time as long as you just had snow, right? Maybe. One of my son's friends lives in Connecticut, so we get to hear a little bit about it, but I don't really know that much about growing in Connecticut. I've never done it. North Carolina and Northern California is the closest I've gotten to actually growing things in your climate. And I would say that you'd want to wait until the last snow is all done. And then you'll just plant those little seeds in a nice moist area. And watch for those little babies to come out of the ground. Well, tiny. There's a little. Okay, other question?
Going back to your previous topic, what kind of oil?
Oh, great question. So one oil that I've used for that violet topical preparation where I'm trying to support its action of moving things through the body is castor oil. Now, some of you may or may not remember, I may be telling you how old I am, but castor oil, often people have used it internally, and that's to flush out the system or make you poop, basically. So used topically, I find that it can help the plant material absorb into my skin and really move things along. But you can use almost any oil. I have a friend that swears by only ever using olive oil in topical herbal preparations. I have some other friends that really are enjoying using coconut oil because they think it smells really nice. It's really the best, whatever oil you have on hand is what I would say. Okay. Any other questions? Growing violet. If I have any friends out there that find a way to grow it in the desert, let me know, because I have herbalist friends that would really enjoy figuring out that method. Thank you. Enjoy your heart shape and those little flowers that are self-pollinating, that give you those gorgeous seeds and will grow all over the floor's floor and really moisten your heart and help your heart feel full. Have a wonderful day.